morning, good morning, good morning. It is 5:30 in the morning on a Monday morning. Welcome to Sketch and Coffee Live with the Artistic Biker. This is 5:30 in the morning on Mondays is when we grab a toy out of the toy box, a random object out of the Random Object Randomogrifier, and we draw it. We put it on this little light stage and we start drawing. You know what? I'm going to spritz these watercolors real quick because I like them juicy and moist. Juicy and moist later on when we go to use them. That way I can just tap into them and I don't have to scrub into them. Today's random object is a Powhatan Mother and Child by the fireside. I know it's a Powhatan Mother and Child by the fireside because it says so on the bottom of the toy. Powhatan Mother and Child. Could be any indigenous people of any age, mother and child by the fireside, but this particular set says Powhatan, and it's from the Powhatan set of cubes from Safari. So I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say that it is indeed a Powhatan mother and child. And I got a little confused because I drew another mother and child the other day, and I thought maybe I had already done this one, but the other one was a frontier woman with child standing. She didn't have fire. And so I find that these sets start running together in my mind. They say that the mind is the second thing to go. I don't remember what the first thing is. But so here we are, 5:30 in the morning on a Monday morning, and we are doing the Sketch and Coffee live. You see, I've just got a quick little block in here where I can show you. I just have a quick little block in here. Well, you can't see that at all. It's all washed out. Just to make sure everything's going to fit on the page. Just want to, let's move this camera. Where does this camera need to go? This camera needs to go this way. Apparently I bumped my camera at some point. That'll make you seasick. Okay. So anyway, what was I saying? I don't remember. Oh, the block in. The block in was pretty basic. I just drew a big oval to make sure everything was going to fit on the page. There are some features on this model that are a bit culturally insensitive. Like I can't tell if they're supposed to be wearing face paint on their eyes or if that's just a misprint on the paint. If it's just a painting issue, we're going to run with the idea that it's just a painting issue and that they're not being culturally insensitive, saying that they painted their eyes, because that is not something that native tribes did, painting their face to just hang around the campfire. Face paint had a very specific religious and tradition, and it usually didn't involve storytelling around the campfire. But the Powhatans, and if you say it wrong, you can say it Powhatan, you can say it Powhatan, Powhatan. There's lots of different ways to say it, and the biggest problem, and we'll come back to this a little bit later, the biggest problem is there is nobody alive today who's ever heard it said by who's ever even heard it said by somebody who knows how it's supposed to sound. There are people who will tell you, they will argue, anthropologists will argue about it, native tribesmen will argue about it, but nobody alive today has ever even heard it said by anybody who knows what it sounds like. And that is a very sad thing to me. These folks in this image are sitting by this fire, and it would have been the time for them to tell stories and traditions, tell each other stories and traditions. It would have been the time to regale each other with their age-old family history and all of the important events that happened to bring them to where they are. And all of that is lost. All of that is completely lost. I believe that the Powhatans were the tribe that Pocahontas belonged to. I could be wrong on that. We're in the right areas. They're in the Virginias and the Americas, and that would put them near Jamestown. So that may be the right tribe. You would think I would have researched that just a little bit better, but I got so caught up in the stories that they would have told around this fireside. There are some really, by the way, good morning, Claudia. I'm glad that you are able to make it. I understand that you're having a bit of tummy trouble, and I'm sorry about that. But I'm glad that you're able to join us today. And if there's anybody else in the chat room, if there's anybody else watching that I haven't acknowledged, please drop a message in the chat so that I can say hi to you. Anyway, but I spent quite a bit of time going down the rabbit hole of the stories that they would have told around the fire, because this would have been their television. This would have been, this was their entertainment for the evening. This was their Netflix. This was what they did. The campfire was everything. And so I started looking at some of their stories, like their generational stories, their Genesis stories, where Ahon, the benevolent God, created a water world, and the spirit animals sought to make it livable to the humans by bringing land and food, and they tried to pull the land forward from the water, and several animals tried, but only the muskrat was able to succeed, and that is why the muskrats are dirty all the time. But the muskrat succeeded in pulling mud up out of the bottom of the water, and that is why we have land to walk and farm on. Those are the kinds of stories they would tell around the fireside. They would tell stories about Nanzabozo. That's what I was trying to figure out what that said. I couldn't read my own handwriting. Nanzabozo is a rabbit spirit animal, and Nanzabozo would teach them things like how to build fires. Nanzabozo would teach them how to build nets. Nanzabozo, the rabbit, watched the spiders build their nests, and so he knew how the spiders did it, and he showed the natives how to make nets to catch fish with. And if I'm saying the name wrong, again, keep in mind, nobody alive can tell you how it was supposed to have been said. Nobody alive has ever heard it said properly. And it's not because I'm culturally insensitive. It's not because I don't care about their plight. It's because their language died. And I don't mean died like Latin. Latin's a dead language also. Their language died to the point that nobody has a record of how it's spoken. The only record we have left of it is what the colonists wrote down. And that's a few key phrases, but not any of their stories, not any of their history. So almost all of that, they're members of the Algonquin family of tribes, and so you have to go back to the Algonquins' stories to come up with what kind of things that the Powhatans would talk about. And that happens all the time. Like my grandmother knew German. My grandmother's 92. She doesn't speak German now, but at one point in her life, she knew German. She didn't teach my mother German. They didn't teach me German. German is not a dead language by any stretch of the imagination, and we could go learn it now. But these folks let their whole language die off, and not by choice. It's not like somebody just woke up one day and said, "You know what? This Powhatan culture thing, it's really killing us. Let's just do away with it." No, it happened through attrition. They just, yeah. My mother's telling me about how Granny spoke German before she went to school. That's German's all she spoke before she went to school. But she never taught us German. My grandfather Fred, on my dad's side, was born in 1898 in a teepee on the Cherokee Indian Reservation. And if he spoke Cherokee, if he even spoke Cherokee, I have no idea. I have no idea. I've never heard him speak Cherokee. I know my dad tells stories about going to the reservations, but I never went to the reservation. My mom says she doesn't think that my grandfather spoke Cherokee, and I know my dad does not speak Cherokee, except for a few key phrases. One of my favorite stories that I came across when I was researching this, was the story about why there are so many different tribes of Indians. Why are there so many different types of people in the world? Yeah, glad it doesn't do any good to speak German to us. I took German in high school, and there was a girl involved. It didn't work out. I just know basic things like ich liebe dich, and I don't have any idea if I'm saying it right. It was not it was not passed on to us. But I'm going to share with you the story about why there's so many different tribes, why there's so many different people in the world, different types of people in the world. According to Algonquin tradition and Powhatan tradition, there were in the very beginning, in the mud that the muskrat brought forth, the people all lived underground, and it was very crowded, and they struggled every day to survive, to find food underground, and to find room to breathe and to live underground. And the mole finally dug a hole up to the surface, and on seeing the sun and the bright skies on the surface, it blinded him, and he's been blind ever since. But he managed to find his way back down the hole and tell the people about the beautiful land above ground that he had discovered. And so the people began to follow the hole to the surface, and they started excitedly running out of the hole, finally happy to be out from under the ground. And there were trees and flowers and chirping birds and basket weavers who sit and smile. No, there were no basket weavers. Anyway, that joke will be lost on everybody under 40. They came above ground, and they saw all the trees and beautiful things above ground, and they started to crawl out of the hole. And then a very fat individual got stuck. And no matter how much they pushed him from below, and no matter how much they pulled him from above, he was stuck. And the ones who were above ground had to move on, and the ones that were below ground had to continue to struggle until the fat one could finally lose enough weight to get out. but they were separated. And the group that was above ground went and traveled down the way a little bit and came across a bird at the riverside. And the bird flapped his wings 3 times and caused the river to split. And they were able to walk across the river on dry land. And the tribe started to cross the river to the new lands on the other side of the river. And the bird flew away. And the rivers came back. And part of the people were trapped on one side of the river, while the remaining people, while the first people managed to travel on. And they came across a hillside at the foothills of the mountains, and they couldn't figure out how to get across the mountains. But a deer showed up to lead them up the hillside. And the deer took them up the hillside and up the top of the mountain, at which point some eagles chased away the deer. And in chasing away the deer, the people who hadn't made it up the hillside and mountain yet lost their guide. And so they were trapped and left behind. But the people who did make it up the mountain, some of them became cold and wanted to move on. And so they moved down into the forests below the mountain, where the trees were so thick that they couldn't see through the trees, and some of them went this way and some of them went that way, and they lost sight of each other. And as they lost sight of each other, they always remembered each other, but they never saw each other again, and only their offspring would come across each other now and then. And that is why there are so many different types of people in the world. It's because of all the events that came to separate us. I like that story. I think that was a pretty neat story. They have a benevolent god named Ahon that would have told the spirit animals to guide them. And then they had a mischievous god named Oak or Oki that would have caused the spirit animals to leave them, would have scared the spirit animals off and caused them to leave. And I just thought that was a really interesting story, the way that it was told. It's very short story. But then what caught my attention was, and this is just me, this is just pure conjecture, and we're going to stop here because I want to talk about this model. It's a plastic model, which means there's shadow on the fire. And I'm gonna paint the shadow on the fire because we're drawing a toy, right? We're not drawing fire, but I really, really want to draw that as fire because I love drawing fire. But I'm going to put the shadow on the fire because the point of this is to draw what we see, to practice drawing what we see every day. Anyway, back to my story. I started noticing similarities between Ahon, the benevolent god, and the European gods that we're aware of, specifically the Scandinavian gods. And it occurred to me that Leif Erikson was in North America about 1,500 years ago. So 1,500 years ago, Vikings show up in North America, and you have these giant, as far as the Native Americans are concerned, you have these giant, boisterous, drinking people who celebrate life and events by throwing tremendous drinking parties and telling loud, boisterous tales And these guys would have been huge, pale skinned with funny hair, funny colored hair, and strange eyes. The women's would love them. The men would be scared of them and maybe want to be them. Because they would be huge and vastly different. And they would tell tremendous tales about how all of their successes and attribute that to Odin. And they would talk about their failures and attribute those to Loki. Now, did that happen? I don't know. I do not know if it happened or not. But the similarity between a hone and oak and Odin and Loki was just too much for me to ignore without telling somebody, because that only happens in places where they have adjacency, where the gods only sound alike in places where they're adjacent to each other. Like Jupiter and Zeus could be considered adjacent. Mars and Ares could be considered adjacent. I think, and this is again just me talking, I think that the names were influenced by 500 years of cultural drift. Not that they believed in Odin and Loki, just the names. Because these loud, boisterous men 1,000 years earlier had exposed them to the names. How are we doing on time? Oh my goodness, we are way behind time. We better get on with this. Let's see here. We need some sepia, and I'm going to add just a touch of orange to the sepia. It's not really sepia, it's yellow ochre. I'm going to add just a touch of orange to the yellow ochre, and let's do her coat. Do do do. Uh-oh. Mom lost her YouTube. It's no bueno, Mom. I'm going to add just a little bit more orange to it because that base is basically the same color. So we'll go ahead and do that base. That they're sitting on, because again, it is a toy. What other kind of stories? They had deer that taught them how to hunt and use all of the different parts of the animal. They're benevolent spirit animals. They had the rabbit that taught them to use the spider's web as a guide to building nets for fishing. They had they had all kinds of stories like that they would tell. And at the winter time they would sit around. Wintertime was a time to gather around the fire and tell stories. When it got dark outside, it would get dark early. So they had to sit around and tell they had to tell stories, because it was the only way to entertain yourselves. There'd be parties where people would gather, seasonal parties for the harvest, seasonal parties for the winter, seasonal parties for the spring, where they would gather and they would tell all the new stories they learned over the season of the park. There would be opportunities like that. And those opportunities are gone for them. The opportunities to keep their to keep their uh, ancient history alive, their tens of thousands of years of struggle, of survival. My dad is talking to my mom in the background, and he says that he never heard his dad or his dad's mother speak Cherokee, but that she would tell him stories about the Cherokee. So at least the stories were preserved in our family. But I haven't heard any of those stories. Dad's holding out on me. My mom says she hasn't heard any of those stories either. She says, she says, you'd think in 58 years I would have heard at least one of those stories. Right? You know, I'm right there behind you. I'm only 55, but you'd think I'd you'd think I'd know at least one of those stories. Let's see. Let's add a little more blue to this. Let's get the logs. We got to wrap this up. I've got to ink it real quick. This is a pretty complicated one to be drawn on a Monday morning, but at least it's not Tuesday. Tuesdays I have to leave just a little earlier because we have a meeting that I have to go to. But so at least it's not Tuesday. But you know, this isn't. I'm telling about how the Powhatan culture and consequently uh, my grandfather's Cherokee culture, how they've not passed their stories on, how they've not passed their language on to their kids, and you would think we would learn from that. But I see it every day around here. I'm in Houston, Texas, and I see it every day around here where third generation Hispanic children don't speak Spanish. Let me dry this real quick. Ooh, we are behind, we are behind, we are behind. But I see it every day where Spanish children don't speak Spanish. Third generation Spanish children don't speak Spanish. Uh, like I said earlier, my grandmother spoke German before she started school. That's all she spoke. I don't speak German. Opportunity lost. Thankfully, there's still a source to learn those languages, but nobody will ever hear Powhatan spoken the way Powhatan is meant to be spoken ever again. All we will ever have are the colonists' notes on what it might have sounded like. And there are people working diligently to try and bring some of these old languages back so that they can keep their family history and their traditions alive, but they just don't have anything to work with. There's no written language. It was never written down, and the cultures that succeeded them didn't record them. Didn't keep a record of what they sounded like or their stories and tales. And that's why it's so important to share that stuff with your family. All of your family stories, all of your family history. That's why it's so important to share that stuff with your family. We have so much to learn from each other. And I hope that when you watch this, you learn a little bit from me too. But that, I think, marks the end of that drawing. Look at that. My 6 o'clock alarm went off just as I finished that part of it. Like I said, I am thankful that this was not a Tuesday drawing. It is the 11th of August, 2025. And that is my version of it. So there's my sketch. Let's see what it looks like from my perspective. If I can make this little camera work. Here we go. Let's see what it looks like from my perspective. Where did it go? There we go. This is what it looked like to me from my perspective. So that's what I did this morning. Let's see here. I'm not sure if I have an egg. I think this is yesterday's egg that I didn't put away. Yep, that's the humpback whale. Oh, my goodness. My kids were camping over the weekend, so I have an egg prepared. But it's okay because the randomogrifier is just right here. That's... I dropped it. Ah! Oh, we haven't done a dinosaur in a while. I wonder what this could be. Let's just see, shall we? That, dear friends, is a Brachiosaurus. So, and it's tiny. I have to remember to fill the whole page up with that tomorrow. It's tiny. That's a Brachiosaurus. So that is what we're going to do tomorrow, the 12th of August. So if you're watching this, my mom says he's tiny. If you're watching this and it's before 5:30 in the morning on the 12th of August, then you're watching the trailer and we're about to draw this. So stick around, we'll get right on it. But for the rest of us, it's time for me to pack this up and go to work. I really do appreciate everybody coming in today. Claudia, I do hope you get to feeling better. This is my favorite time of the day when I get to come down and art with my besties. It keeps me accountable to my art practice, and it gives me an opportunity to share some stories with everybody. Be sure and tune in tomorrow, same Artistic Biker time, same Artistic Biker channel. And then we dance. We dance until somebody says they see me dancing. It gives you a chance to click the linky things around me, and it gives the lag a chance to catch up so that when I do get